Welcome to Gen Z Hoops, the Gen Z basketball, coaching, and sports business show.
What's going on, guys? Welcome back to another episode of the Gen Z Hoops podcast. Today, I'm joined by senior producer of the Miami Heat radio and television broadcast, Mr. AJ Speaks. Mr. Speaks, how are you doing today, sir?
I'm great, Ashton. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity and coming on the show today.
Of course, anytime.
So before we jump into our little conversation here about your career and of course you being the senior producer of the Miami Heat television broadcast and radio broadcast as well, can you talk a little bit about your connection to the game of basketball?
It started when I was 5. It's the reason why I do what I do. Like, I love basketball. And for me, it was playing, it was learning from my father, learning from my uncles in Baltimore, and just sort of just falling in love with my grandfather, just falling in love with the game, and that's really the root of why I am still doing what I do and at the professional level, because I just loved it as a kid. So then for me, my teams are kind of all over the place, but it started with Magic and the Lakers, and that was where my first love of professional basketball came. But growing up in Virginia, you had to pick a college team. The pros you saw, you were either Lakers or Celtics at the time, and some Sixers, but you had to pick a college team. And I grew up in Southern Virginia, so there was a lot of UVA fans around that time. This guy you might have heard of named Michael Jordan hit a game-winning shot. So there were a lot of UNC fans. There were a lot of Maryland and Georgetown fans, and I just liked the color blue, and I didn't like that sky blue, and I went with royal blue. And there was a guy by the name of Johnny Dawkins, and I was like, man, this dude, he jumps out the gym, he's fun to watch. I'm just gonna like this team Duke. Nobody else likes Duke. I'm gonna like Duke. And at the time, they weren't what everyone knows what Duke has become.
Right.
And so I was a Duke fan at a very, very young age, and it was so young that people used to say Coach K couldn't coach. And they were like, I would get ridiculed when they would lose. And so they lost, to this team called Seton Hall I had never heard of. As fate would have it, that's where I'd end up going to college. And then they lost by 30 in the championship game. So people just always drilled Duke, and Duke was terrible and this and that. Then it clicked. And then they started winning and winning a lot. And people started, looking at them differently. But my love for basketball had already been deep by then, and so that's really what it boils down for me. I'm glad you started with that question, because for me, basketball was always my first love and still is my first love in sports.
Yeah, same here. You were giving me a little heat about like my teams as well, being all over the place as well as like many of my friends, because I live in New York and I'm a Heat fan. You were kind of like made me prove it before we started the
Well,
right
for the people that are just listening, I just want them to know that the picture right behind you is Carmelo Anthony. So, and then it looks like Derrick Rose is on your shoulder, and you tell me you're a Heat fan. So it doesn't match up, Ashton. It doesn't match up.
You got Jimmy on the iPhone right
You have
there.
to show me your phone. You need to get a D Wade picture behind you.
I need an autograph, D Wade.
And then I'll be like, okay, you know what? He likes D Wade. But that's why I give you a hard time. But to your point, you fall in love with the game and you fall in love with your teams. And so I'm giving you a hard time, but like, it is what it is. Like, people just find things about franchises. They find things about players. They find things about whatever it is that they just fall in love with. And for me, it was Magic. And then, I was a bandwagon Laker fan for the 80s. And then this guy, Michael Jordan, took over. I'd watch him all the time. And then, but college basketball was always that love, that thing for me. So I just stuck with that. And I ended up at the Heat, and I was never a Heat fan. I didn't even know a lot of the players. I knew, the famous ones, but I didn't watch Heat games all the time. And so for me, it made it easy for the job that I do to make it about basketball, and to learn from Heat fans and keep Heat fans around me, to keep me ingrained in what's going on in the Heat Nation. And even now, keeping younger fans like yourself so that I can be aware of what's going on in the Gen Z Heat Nation. And just so that we can share stories for all of our people, everybody, for every age group that's a Heat fan. So that's my job on the television side, is to be able to tie that all together, get the younger fans, get the older fans. And then the key, though, to it is making it about basketball. As long as we make it about the game, and as Spoelstra always, the main thing, yeah, we're good. As long as we do that, we're doing justice to the game. And that's how I look at it.
Yeah, most definitely. Well, that leads me into my next point, actually. So, at what point did you know that you wanted to pursue a career in media and broadcast?
Man, I thought that I wanted to be on air, to be honest with you. I thought that, when I was in college at Seton Hall, well, I'll even take it back. When I was younger, I knew I couldn't play in the NBA. And so then, like, how am I going to be involved in sports? How am I going to be? What is it going to be? And so, I would watch Up Close with Roy Firestone, and that was the person that I wanted to be like. And then when I got to college, I would do radio, and I did all of those things, and I enjoyed it. And then an internship took me to HBO Sports, and that's when I learned boxing and I learned the production side of television. And boom, I just started, opportunities started presenting themselves through that. So I went to the Heat, and I just wanted a job. So I got a job in sales, and I was terrible at sales. I couldn't sell water to a well. I was terrible. I was, I couldn't, because I don't ask for money. I'm not good at asking for money. However, I knew the game inside out. So I'd have great conversations, but I'd hang up the phone and be, hey, did you get the sale? I'm like, nah, I didn't ask them. Like, yo, you gotta ask for money. And it's just like, I realized that wasn't for me. But thankfully, the Heat had, or actually American Airlines Arena at the time had a boxing event, and they needed some help with that. So I slid over there and volunteered and offered to just help them. And it was their first boxing event ever. So I did all the things that I had learned at HBO Sports, showed them how to do a boxing event from the broadcast back inside. And that slid me over to broadcast.
Wow, that's amazing. So you would say your position as a assistant stage manager was, right, at HBO Sports, like kind of
Uh-huh.
like helped you propel yourself into like the role you are now in a way.
Oh, 100%. Like, there's a woman named Tammy who still does some HBO sports stage managing. She showed me how to do it, and so then I'd be in the back and telling boxers, like, hey, you got an hour and a half till you got to come out. Hey, you got 15 minutes or whatever it is. Then I watched her in the ring, and she would help everything be organized and set up in the ring. So then when they had the boxing event here in Miami, they didn't have either one of those positions. So I'm like, all right, bet I'll just do both. And when I did that, I impressed the people that powers that be, and they're like, oh yeah, you know what, I heard you're not doing too well in sales, could you slide over, would you mind coming over to the broadcast side? And I was like, oh yeah, because my days are numbered. And so then I slid over, and I had to learn how to edit, and I had to learn how to do things that weren't live. And I found that live event sports is my strength. Editing and sitting in a stage was not. So after a little bit of that, I realized, like, okay, I need to find something that allows me to be in live events, like to be just a part of that. And so I was headed back to New York, and on my birthday, the Heat traded for Shaq. And that day I was like, you know what? Let me see what happens with this. And that's when I learned, like, a player like him just changes a franchise. Like, and once he did, all of these jobs started opening up, and some of them in production. And then I started as a production assistant on the television side, traveling with the team, carrying tapes, doing the dirty work, doing whatever needed to be done to help Ted Ballard put our broadcast together. And that's really what my focus was. And then from there, like, opportunities started presenting themselves. And I tell young people, like, hey, you have to be ready to catch. So the first thing that I always say is you got to, know your role, identify whatever that role is. And for me, at the beginning, it was carrying the tapes, getting everything to every city, traveling to all the NBA cities with the team and making sure that we had everything we need. And I made mistakes. I left stuff. I had to figure it all out. But what you saw, you start to know your role. And then the next step is you really start to embrace your role. And you're like, okay, yeah, I got to carry these tapes, but I'm going to be the best at this. I'm going to be the best person at knowing where this is. I'm going to do that. And that leads you to that next step, which is starring in your role. Once you start to star in your role, then people start to look at you like, oh man, like, this person, he's ready to go, or she's ready to go to the next step. And then usually what happens at the good organizations is then they enlarge your role, and then next thing you know, you get another opportunity and you get a new title, and then you have to start all over again. And then you do that over and over again in good places. Sometimes people have to leave, go other places, and come back, or whatever the case may be. Fortunately for me, I've been able to stay in the same organization, but that's really what it's about at each level. And I tell young people this all the time. That's how you do, and that's what we do at the Heat. They bring players in, right? And they're like, oh, they get these people off the street. Well, the first thing they do is they identify the role for them. And they
Exactly.
tell them, yo, know your role. If you need to set screens, set screens. And then it's everything, the step that I told you. The next step of it is like Duncan Robinson. Okay, master your role, and then you start to star in your role. Okay, we're going to enlarge it. Oh, they're going to go at you defensively. Guess what? You need to start working on that. And you do all of those things. It's the same process. So people ask me all the time if heat culture is real. Oh, it's real. But it's all about the process. It's not about all the other stuff that people like to get caught up in. It's about understanding and mastering the process and then taking it to the next level.
It's not even just I don't even think it's like just on the basketball side of things as well, like in the organization. Like everyone knows the famous story of Erik Spoelstra coming from like the video room as a video coordinator, and now he's like the head coach of a two-time NBA champion as well. So that is a testament, like on the court and off the court in the organization, everyone follows like kind of the same blueprint in a way.
It is totally across the organization. Spo was a video coordinator, and he told me one day I was editing. He's like, "Hey, meet me at 5:30." I'm like, "Damn." He's like, "Yeah, that's what we do." I'm like, "All right." So I met him at 5:30. I was there early. We did what we had to do, and we kept it moving. And from that moment on, you could always tell that he was going to be a star in his field. But really, what happens is Pat Riley knew and had a vision for him. And some people, you look at it, I'm not gonna lie, just like anybody else, like, I don't know, they don't have any head coaching experience, they don't have this, they don't have that. So you question it. But when people truly believe that you have what it takes and you've put in the work, and he did things that people didn't know about, like all the notes that he would take. He tells a story about being an English major and how being an English major ended up helping him because he would have to write these meticulous notes for Pat Riley. And Pat loved all the notes and all the things that he would do. And so he didn't realize that, but that's what helped him make notes and helped him understand. And then he'd go back and have to critique it and all those things. And that led to Pat being like, man, this guy has what it takes. I'm watching how hard he works. I'm seeing all these things behind closed doors. So the fan doesn't know. You know what I mean? The fan thinks like, oh, he's just picking somebody. But Pat knows all the work that he's put in.
Right.
To tie it into my love for Duke. Coach K did the same thing with John Shire. I was skeptical again, like, yo, why? And then I caught myself. I'm like, oh, I've seen this happen before. Like, why am I skeptical? And you realize, like, these coaches, they identify certain people. They see the things and the hard work and what they put in behind the scenes. They've invested in them and they give them an opportunity. Now, then it's on that person to do exactly the same thing I just told you. Know their role, identify their role, start in the role. Then they got to do all of that. That's on them. Some of them can make it, some of them won't. And we just watch. There was a moment when, and Spo talks about this, when Spo was so close to not being around, and for you as a Heat fan, you remember the moment. I'll take you there. Game 6, LeBron, 45 points in the Garden. If they don't win that game, that's 2 years in a row not winning a championship with that group. It's going to be hard to keep that person in that head coaching position. I can't say definitively. I'm just saying we've talked around those things. Like it would have been really hard to keep him in that spot,
or even keep the team together at that point.
All of those things, because you know how it is. If you don't win, something's got to change. So it's just like, okay, how do you do that? So that's where you realize, like, that moment to me changed everything for Spo, and he went from being on the brink to now being one of the greatest coaches of all time in the NBA. And it's crazy to think that it could have been that close with that one game that just changed the franchise at that time.
Yeah, of course. Even like, I don't know if you're familiar with like the OG show with like UD and Mike Miller. They were talking about that game because they had Shane Battier on the podcast as well. They were saying like how that one game changed all their lives. Like they went from that one game changed them to becoming like NBA champions. Or they can like sit back and reflect on it. Their careers would have panned out like so differently if like they didn't win that game in the TD Garden.
I haven't listened to that particular podcast, but they were there. I was there with them. Like, we all know that
came late.
That whole everything about it. Everybody knows that was that moment that pivoted everything in towards the direction of winning that second title for the Heat, first title for that group, and then winning the next one. And you realize like all of those things led up to that. And that's why, you're a Heat fan, so I'll stay on this topic for you. That's why when you hear Spo talking about building our habits, That's really what it's about. And
Yeah.
it's the same thing with us in the production world or anything we do. We want to bring in people and start building good habits and consistent habits. And then you build on that. And then it's like getting to your habits. So yeah, you may lose games, you may have certain situations, you may have this, but as long as we've established that these are the habits that we want to do, and this is the standard that we're working toward, it's always a championship level standard, we're going to be all right. And in everything we do, and in every part of our organization, like if we establish that our standard is going to be the best, we're going to have the best television broadcast in the NBA. Who? Everybody knows that. That's our goal. Now, how do we do that? We bring in people, we work at a certain level, and we do all those things that I talked to you about. As long as that's our standard and that's our goal, we're going to be all right. And that's part of what my job is to constantly, consistently work at myself and work at our craft to get better. So then for me, I'll do things like, and shortly I'll head over to the Olympics and I'll produce the basketball for the OBS on the Olympics. And the reason why I do that is to stay sharp, is to work on the craft, to work on replay producing, to work on, the different cameras and angles and all the things that we have, and to just stay in touch with the game. And because of the love of the game, we do the women's side, we do the men's side, and you just find like the passion, love that all these countries and these people have for the game. My job is to show that. So they have it. You got to put it on TV. And then I leave from that, Ashton, and I'm like, man, I feel so much better. And it helps me go right into the heat season ready to roll. I'll come back and I'll do a few Dolphins preseason games. And then from there, NBA preseason starts about a month later. And you just roll right into that. And then you just keep yourself going. And that's where you stay sharp. You master your craft and you just work at it and you work at it and you work at it.
Yeah, most definitely. So before, you previously mentioned about like kind of like building on your role that you have in a certain amount of time and then fulfilling that role, and then you get promoted to a next role. In 2005, you became the assistant producer for the television and radio broadcast. How did it feel to finally become like a producer, and what were the biggest challenges of this position?
To be honest with you, it was a natural progression. It was one of those things where I told you, like you sort of you do the little things, you do what's asked of you, and then it's like, hey, can you produce this pregame show? Sure. Can you produce this game? Sure. And you have to go through it. You know what I mean? And it's hard. And in those early stages, I did select amount of games here and there. I didn't do a ton, but I would help, and I would help do whatever we needed to do to get things done. It was really in 07, 08 when I started producing a lot. And you're probably really young, but like that was the year that the Heat they had won a championship 05, 06. 06, 07, they lost to the Bulls. I think swept out of Bulls. In 07, 08, they won 15 games.
Yeah.
15. And that was the year that I really got to produce a lot of games. And you know what I learned? That was the best year for me to learn how to produce, because it wasn't about, how great your team was. It wasn't just show Shaq, or later what we would do, hey, show LeBron. Like, you have these stars. It was dive into the game. What parts of this game can you tell us and teach us? What parts of the other team will you do? And you start to learn, like, all right, you got to find a balance. You don't have a Heat team to be able to just glorify all the time. So you got to tell the story of the other team. And so that year was instrumental for my success as a producer, because I had to learn how to really storytell. And the best part of it was, at the end of the year, I think we had won like 14 games at the time. And I overheard Mike Tirico talking to Eric Reid, our play-by-play guy. And they were just talking about, Tirico was doing a game for ESPN. And he's like, hey, I watched y'all's broadcast the other day. He's like, it's unbelievable how good you guys are and how hard you work. And you only have 14 wins. He's like, that's a testament to your crew. He didn't know I was the producer. And I was sitting there just listening, and I was just smiling. I'm like, man, that's what it's about. You hear somebody like Tirico compliment something that you worked really hard on. And you're like, man, we're doing a really good job. We ended up winning 15 games that year. But then from there, you just start to build off of it. And you get your confidence. Okay, we did this well. We could get better here. We can get better there. And then as that happens, they start giving you more games. And so then, titles change or what have you, but it's really responsibility. It's like, okay, you go from doing 10 games to doing 20 games to now do the majority of our games. And that's happened for a while now. And it's just like you do, and you have a good team. And it's not just me. It cannot happen with just me. It's the whole crew. So what you realize is, like, all your interns matter, your production assistants matter, your associate directors matter. everybody in your group matters. And that goes back to what I told you before. It's like, all right, what's our process? How are we going to hire? How are we going to develop these people? How are we going to get this whole group together so that we can attack this broadcast as a unit and do the best? Go back to us, the standard of the best in the NBA. That's the goal. Are we the best? That's subjective. But do we work to be the best? Yes.
Yep.
Every single broadcast. That's the goal. If we win 15 games, if we won over 60 games, it doesn't matter. We work with that same standard as how hard we're going to work. And we're fortunate that the organization gives us a lot of resources. So we need to use those resources and take advantage of them. And that's how we roll.
Yeah, I totally agree with that model, like setting that standard. I used to have like an old AAU coach. Well, he coached me over when I went over to play in Greece, like a couple of like my senior year and junior year. He would always say like we got to strive towards perfection, even though it's like unattainable. So we hold ourselves to that standard, and like like perfection's like all the way up here. Like you can't reach that, but you got to like keep pushing yourself every day to like get to that standard. So that I
And
kind of
he's
resonate.
right. And I would say it goes even further because it starts in practice. People always want to just worry about the performances, the
Yeah.
games, but it's really those off days. It's
Oh
it's what
yeah.
you do and take advantage of those, and it's your practice. And the same thing in their production. What do we do? Like it's so easy to rest on the off days, but like, hey, let's get ahead of this. Like, what are we going to work on next? Let's get these people pulling the footage. Let's get everybody. Let's put in enough work on these off days so that when the game days come, it's easier. And then we can just react to the game. But we have all of our other bells and whistles and production tightened up. And now the game will give us the story. Whatever happens in the game is what we're going to respond to. But it's the same thing when you have people like yourself that play hoops. It's like coaches are always telling you, practice. Kids don't
Yeah.
understand. Like the practice is what matters. Like you got to practice these good habits. Then the game is where you show that, hey, you've gotten your good habits. It's the same thing in what we do.
Yeah, of course. Actually, like, yeah, my college, like, our practices are like 20 times harder than the game. Actually, like, there's no fouls like that. Um, Even in the off season, like, we'd have like a lift. Guys are getting in the gym like 2 times a day, like by themselves. Then we'd have like our own team like scrimmages going on. So it was like we're in that gym like 4 times a day, like all
Ashton,
together.
that's when you grow. Like
Yeah.
any college coach will tell you, I was fortunate. I went to Seton Hall. So there's two coaches that coach in college, Lavelle Sanders at Binghamton and then Shaheen Holloway at Seton Hall. Like I'm good friends with both of them. And they will both tell you, you got to work hard
Yeah.
in practice. And they are on their players right now. I think they get back at the beginning of July. Some of them, each school's different. But this is where the growth happens. Everybody wants to look at the games like, hey, well, you could tell how hard they worked and how now you got to put your team together differently. You got to start all over and build all of those things, those good habits. This is when it happens.
Yeah, most definitely. I totally agree. So in 2017, you came into your current role as the senior producer of the television and radio broadcast. So can you talk a little bit about your responsibilities in this position and what was it like to make that transition?
The biggest thing in the transition again is more responsibility. So it's like a lot of the role with like, hey, you're responsible for games, you're responsible for this, that stays the same, but it's all about continuing to develop like more people. So it's like, all right, you have a bigger team. So you work with radio now. So, okay, eventually in that span, Jason Jackson slid over into the radio chair. It's okay. You work with Jason, you bring in Amy, you work with Jason and Amy, you bring in Ben Rivera as our producer, you work with him and you have tied all these people together and you start to build a solid radio team. You had Tommy Ty, you had Solana, you do all these things to work on the radio team. And now that's our goal. It's like, okay, it's the same thing. That wasn't my responsibility before. Now it is. How do we build it? How do we build the Heat Weekly show? How do we build the broadcast? How do we add, and take that? And again, how do we make that the best in the NBA? And it's hard because you got to work on each individual. Like it's different. You got to work on their craft. Okay, Jason has to get better. Amy has to get better. I have to get better. Ben, everybody has to get better in order to raise us to the level that we have to go. And you gotta stay on it. So that's really what the biggest change has been. It's like, okay, from the television side, we got a good crew. We've been together a long time. We know what we have to do. The thing with that is just not getting complacent, not allowing ourselves to get complacent. Like, how do we get better? How do we tap into Gen Z? We're constantly thinking about that. We're constantly thinking about how do we, activate that fan base? How do we stay, what we talked about before? So like those are the things with it's a title change, but the responsibility part that really happens really was with the radio side and then just building our team on both sides and really working to make sure that we added new people. I'm big on hiring. I'm big on hiring. I'm big on the process of hiring. It took a lot of failure to figure out the right process, but once we've gotten it now, I enjoy hiring. It's a lot of work, but it's worth the reward because I feel that our process has been sharp. So we just go through our process, and it's not on me, it's on the collective, because I believe in the collaboration. So our whole group will collaborate, and then at the end of the day, you usually can tell the best candidate will present themselves, and you're like, man, this person's going to really help our team. And they're not the most skilled, but you could tell all the other intangibles, they help our team. And it's the same thing when you look at the Heat and the way they put their roster together.
Right.
Like, hey, who's this Caleb Martin guy? And then next thing like, oh, we can't lose Caleb. It's like, yeah, because he did all the other things that we talked about to make himself valuable, and that's what you do when you're identifying those players. It's the same thing. They figured out their process to identify players and develop players. We identify how we can help find staff and develop staff. Same process. And we're both working to a championship standard.
Yeah, of course. So I'm a big fan of the broadcast team, as I've stated before. What is it like to work with Erik, Reid, and John Crotty?
The key for me with both of them is that the three of us share a love of basketball. That's really at the core of what it is with Erik and with John, is that we love basketball. Now, I mentioned I grew up in Virginia, so I'll start with John. John was a legend in college basketball in Virginia. Like, he was a big deal. My high school and college friends, when they see him call me on my phone, they're like, yo, that's John Crotty? I'm like, yeah, but he was that big a deal. So we shared the love of basketball. He was a McDonald's All-American. Yeah, I remember that. He was nice. Like, he was this athletic kid from Jersey doing reverses. You're like, what? But that's for what we share is the love of basketball. So when we prepare, it's always about the game. I pick his brain, he picks my brain. Like, hey, do you think they may do this? Hey, do you think they may do that? We have the resources, so we're able to go talk to Spo and ask him. And, can't give all the answers away on air, but we can say, hey, there's just things that you need to look for, and so on and so forth. Erik's passion for the game goes back even further, because he grew up going to Knicks games with his pops. Right. And that's where his love for the game and what he grew up and watching and being involved in, all his neighbors and the people that he's been exposed to at a young age from a basketball level, that's where his passion comes from. So for us, the three of us, we connect there, and it's easy. So our meetings, our conversations are always about the game. And once we make it about that, we were good. So it just took a while to figure it out. But you figure out, all right, we may disagree on this or that, but we love this. So let's just focus on that. Or, sometimes, and I'll speak to Erik, his preparation, he's always looking at, the other team and this and that. So now we can tell stories about different players. And I love when we hit on a player. Right. And we pick somebody that maybe you haven't heard of, and we're like, oh man, you know what? Let's spotlight this player, even if it's simply just showing a live shot of him as a player to watch. And the next thing he starts making buckets, and you're like, man. Then you come back and you might tell a Roland and have a story on him, and you're like, man, that really worked out well. So those are what we try to do, is we try to story tell. One that pops in my mind as I'm telling you this is Walker Kessler. I think in his rookie year, we were prepared to tell his story and his connection to his uncle Alec Kessler, who played for the Heat. We were prepared for all of that. And sure enough, he made a basket or two. We came back, we told his story. And at the end of that, we're like, man, we did a good job covering that. And that's what our goal is. Our preparation leads us to that. And so working with Erik, working with John, it's all about being prepared. Those off days I told you, the practice days, doing the things we need to do on practice days so that when game days arrive, we're ready.
Yeah, most definitely. Actually, like thinking back to like when I was like really younger, I would always think about like Erik Reid screaming like kaboom in the mic or all that stuff. Like, I feel like I just love watching that broadcast because it makes like the game like way more fun and like intriguing. Like, he always comes up with these like nice sayings. Like when Jimmy hit that game time bucket like a couple years back, his first year in Miami against the Hawks when they came back, he was like, the Butler did it. And then he was like, whenever Tyler Hero hits his like, yes, yes. hero,
It-
Miami.
it's it's a
Yeah.
gift. Everyone has a gift, right? And so for Erik, he has the gift of words, and
Yeah.
it's off air, it's on air. It's just like he's gifted with knowing the right words and when to use them and how to use them. And it's really fun to watch. There's
Yeah.
people in our crew, Bob Hewitt and I, who Bob's our graphic director, and he directs some of our games too. But we sit there and look at each other like, man, he's so good with words.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's just we'll come back with a shot of a scenic of part of the city. He'll tie it right into the
Yeah.
broadcast and tie it into the game. I'm like, damn, I'm like, oh, how do you do that? But everybody has their gifts, right? And that's his gift. And so then he'll tie it into the bright and then we'll keep moving. And you're like, man, that was seamless. Almost like it was intentional, but it really wasn't. Sometimes it's just like, he's just good with words and he knows how and when to say the right thing.
Yeah, exactly. Especially when he says like Miami runs on Duncan whenever Duncan Robinson hits, like that's my favorite one by far. But
Well, Jason Jackson's good with that too. The Duncan one, I think he probably had a little bit to do with that one because he played a lot. I can't remember, so I don't want to give credit to one or the other. But Jason loves all that Duncan stuff, and he's really good with words too. He has a different, unique skill where he likes to be, and he got this from his days with ESPN when he did NBA Tonight. He plays with words, and he plays with the almost like a hip hop style and like being slick and having fun and he came up with Stuart Scott and so then they all had their own little flavor of the way that they would do things. And the crazy part about it is I used to watch Jason Jackson when I was at Seton Hall. We would watch him at midnight. Heat Live would come on and we or not Heat Live, I'm sorry, NBA Tonight would come on and we would watch it. And I always like, man, this dude's funny, but he's corny, man. And like his glasses like, yo, but we watched it every night because that's how we would get our highlights. And then a few years later, we're sitting next to each other. We become great friends and we work together all the time. And I learned to be able to lean on his strengths and to be able to, oh, okay, this is what happens. And he taught me a lot about production and television and standard. Like he's big, big, big on the standard and he's
right.
big on knowing your craft. He's taught me a great deal about like, multiple streams of income, like the things that you need to do in order to make yourself better. Like that's where working with Jason has helped me tremendously. And so I'm forever thankful for Erik, John, and Jason because all of them have their different skills that if you're a sponge, you can learn from them. And then they'll learn from you because I have a passion for, whatever my part of basketball. I remember we were playing Toronto and we were playing Erik was talking about forget his first name, Parker. He's like, yeah, he's got a sister that's pretty good. I'm like, Candace Parker in his ear. He's like, yeah, Candace Parker. And this is before she even blew up.
Right.
And so he's like, yo, how did you know that? I'm like, oh, she's a big deal, and then, so you add the little things. And this is when I don't even remember what role I was, but this is when I was like coming through. And then you start to develop that relationship where it's like, yo, you really know, I mean, I just pay attention to that level of basketball. I love it, and that's how you start to add, and you get that respect. And it's like, oh, okay. And it becomes give and take.
Funny thing you mentioned the hip hop like style that Jason Jackson brings, like what like looking back to when I was like in middle school, I remember him like driving around like the American Airlines Arena, it was called at the time, in like a cart with like I think it was James Johnson and Tyler Johnson. They were singing like TLC, Scrubs, like all of them. They had like the microphones and stuff like that. Like just looking back, he was a part of all
Yeah.
those video bomb moments of like Chris Bosh and the crew and all
Yeah.
that. I
Well,
sometimes watch all those videos. Like,
what he did well was, and he still does well, is he was able to, and he's able to have a connection with the players, and there's a healthy respect there from them and for him. And it's just like, that's where he's learned to master his craft and what he's asked to do for the Heat, So what you're talking about was an in-arena initiative. It wasn't even anything that was, we showed it on the broadcast, but it was something that was for in-arena and he just mastered it and he was a part of it. And that's his gift. His gift is to be able to do the interviews back in the day that you're talking about with the photo bombs and to be able to have the relationship that he has with LeBron and Dwyane and Bosh. I'll tell you this because I know you're going to ask me about my favorite broadcast. And my favorite broadcast that I've ever done was D-Wade's last game. His last game in Brooklyn versus the Nets. And I'll tell you why. The night before we had the home game, right? And that's when, everybody was there. We had all these things. It was crazy. And I didn't produce that game. Ted Ballard produced that game. And it would have been easy for me to take a lot of the things that the production that happened in that game and just carry it over to the next game. Because you could say like, hey, people in the home game didn't see it, so they'll get to see it on the road. That would have been the easy way to do it, right? So we get on the plane and I sit down next to Jason, and I'm like, I always had my Jason and our seats are always together for the length of our careers at the Heat. And so I'm like, man, do we go hard with this next game or do we just lay it up? Like, what do we do? And so he didn't even answer. I just thought about it. I'm like, you know what? I've known D Wade since the beginning. We owe it to him to go all out. So then we write what we call a tease. I wrote what I call a tease. And it was really like a basketball love letter. And it was just, talking about him from the beginning. I spent a lot of time with D Wade at the beginning of his career when nobody knew who he was. We would walk through the mall in Houston and nobody would bother him. He'd be in the gallery and like he'd just be walking, and eventually, as years went by, he couldn't go to the mall. He wouldn't even go to the mall anymore. But, so from the beginning, so I started that love letter, that basketball love letter in that way. And so then that's how we wanted to start our broadcast. So I'm like, cool, we're going to start with that. The NBA said, hey, you can mic D Wade up that game and we'll mic him up. And so we were like, okay, we got with Dana Jones from the NBA. We're going to mic him up. She has to sit in the truck and approve everything, but we're going to do that. So then Jason and I were like, we go through, we land in Brooklyn at like 3, where we land, and then we go from Jersey to Brooklyn like 4:00 in the morning. We're back. We're getting in the hotel. And I know I need to be over at the truck by like 1 or 2, whatever it is. But I'm like, all right, one of those days, you ain't gonna get a whole lot of sleep. So you just do everything you need to do to prepare. So then we get to the broadcast side of it. And so our crew is back in Miami working on the tease that I wrote. And it was a long one for me. So, Jose Cisneros is editing it. Ross Leviton's helping him. Amanda Fuentes was our intern at the time. She's communicating with me that like, hey, I'm not sure they're going to make it. It's like, we're up against it. Like, it's tough. So I'm like, all right, as a producer, like, all right, what am I going to do? We can balance this, balance that. Well, with like 30 seconds to go before we come on the air, they start sending me the tease. We take it into the truck and we turn it right around. And so you see it back at home. Nobody at home has a clue what I'm talking about. But they start seeing the production coming back on their TV and we're getting it in at the same time. So it's crazy, but it gives you adrenaline. So we're like, all right, well, we started on time. The fun part about the broadcast, though, became Jason and I'm like, Jason, we got to do something different. He was like, all right, let's see. LeBron was supposed to be at the game, Carmelo, all these people. Let's see if any of them will do an interview with us. I'm like, all right, cool. Let's see. Jax walks up to LeBron. First thing he says, for you, Jax, anything. So then, boom, we get him as our first interview. We get Gabrielle Union as our second interview. We get Tom Crean as our third interview. Nobody cared about the game. We were getting blown out. They were getting blown out, but nobody cared. But then D Wade's talking trash to CP and the Melo about, I'm going to try to get a triple-double. We had that on his mic because we had him mic'd up. So we did all of those things, and the whole broadcast just came together beautifully. Like it became my favorite broadcast. And we were rewarded with it. It ended up winning an Emmy, but I also learned from it because the one mistake I made in that broadcast was at the end. The very end, we're on the floor with D Wade. He's talking to all of his friends, and he's there. Erik and John were talking over while he was out there. We should have closed his mic. We should have closed both of their mics and allowed that moment just to happen and allowed us to listen. And you know how I learned that, Ashton? The very next week, Tiger Woods won the Masters. And when he won the Masters, the announcers were closed, and he just had all of that moments with his family. And I sat there and I'm like, I messed that up, but it's still my favorite broadcast, but it's a lesson that I learned from that. Like, hey, if we ever do this, if I'm ever in a situation producing anything else again, and it actually, did happen or didn't happen, but I'll tell you that later, but like you learn from it and you're just in those moments and you realize like, hey, allow that to breathe, allow that to happen. And what I was going to say is like years later, when I did the Olympics, the Japanese women's team, they had moments like that. And we allowed that. We just stayed with it. And it gave me goosebumps watching them. And they were so excited just to make it to the gold medal game. They knew they were going to get blown out by USA. But it's like you allow all of that to happen, and you learn your lessons.
Wow, that's amazing. Like I remember watching that game live. You see, like even saw like the emergence of Duncan Robinson that game. Wade threw him that one lob, and like LeBron even he like did that video bomb. He like brought back his like smile meme back. Melo pump faking the shot. That was a truly amazing game in
Yeah,
Brooklyn.
you got it all. You got it.
Yeah,
That game to
I
me
remember it. I remember.
is my favorite by far. It's a favorite broadcast I've ever done. I have the Emmy over here somewhere, and that's the one that I actually keep out, because it just reminds me of why we do it, how we did it, the love of doing it. Like it was all about all of it and the teamwork. Like we couldn't have done it with all the people without all the people that I named and even other people that I did name on our team that really made that all come together. So that wasn't an AJ thing, but as a producer, you're the point guard. So you got to run point on how this is where we're going to take this. You know what I mean? So then it's just like, all right, let's go. This is what we're going to do. And then for me, it's always like, let me get Jackson touch. Let me get Erik and John going. All right, boom, let's get this person going. Let's get that. And it's like, you just run point. And then you let the game give you whatever the game's going to give you. So it's like, okay, we got some good sound on D-Wade. Boom, let's talk about that. Oh, he's going for a triple-double. Cool. Oh, he got it. And an assist to Udonis at the end of the third quarter. Like, yo, let's run that back. Bro, we were down 30 or whatever it was. It didn't matter. Nobody cared, So then we got Mike Miller in the crowd. Jackson, of course, is New York. So there's a funny guy in the audience mad at him and Jackson talking trash back and forth. And so it's just funny, but they were good memories. And you're like, man, that to me was my favorite broadcast just because of the way it all came together.
Yeah, I totally agree. So before I close this interview up, I'd like to ask you, since you've been in the career, since you had a career in media and broadcast for like such a long time, over 21 years, what advice do you have for those looking to pursue a career in media and broadcast?
It's what I told you. If they go back and listen to the root of what we talked about, it's really about identifying your role. And I won't go through each step again, but that's truly what it's about. My advice to them is like, hey, you want to get into this, you want to, whatever level it is, identify which role you have, and then embrace that role, and then star in that role and really, really do it and then see what happens. And maybe that role will get enlarged, but you really don't get caught up in your title. Don't get caught up in your pay. Don't get caught up in the social media, what people think about you, trying to get more likes and all of that. Master the craft. Master it. Understand how to do all the things in that role that you're being asked to do. Master that. And then go to the next thing. You know what I mean? And that's my advice to all of the people that come in that work with us. I'm like, yo, don't get caught up in the stuff. And a lot of those people that I named you started as interns for us. And now they've worked their way up because they did exactly what we said. And then now they have roles and they're a part of bringing on new people and they're part of developing new people and managing new people and helping them get to their next level, So that's really what it's all about for me. I tell people like, just don't try to put the cart before the horse. Oh, I can do this. I can do that. No, do this. What do I need you to do? Or what needs to be done? Do that. Do it really, really well. You'll get another opportunity to do something else.
Yeah, most definitely. Thank you so much for your time today, Mr. Speaks. Good luck with the Olympics and enjoy the Heat off season. I promise I'll have my Dwyane Wade picture up there next episode.
And Ashton, I want to say to you, I think you do a really good job, and everybody that works on that Gen Z podcast, from what I can tell, you guys work really hard. And it seems like you're heading in the right path. So I wish you nothing but the best of luck. Stay in touch. If you have any questions or anything I can help you with, do not hesitate to reach out.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thanks for listening to Gen Z Hoops. Make sure to follow, like, and subscribe on Instagram, LinkedIn, and all major social media platforms at Gen Z Hoops. You can tune in and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, and every other podcast platform on the planet. Get ready for the next episode.